Hello everyone. Today is April 19th, 2023, and we will talk today about drying oils. But before we wait in everybody else, and I want to let you know, so next month, we still didn't plan exactly the date when we will have our next session of AMA. Because we travel, and so we will go to Washington on Reston for Portrait Society. Yes, we will be on Portrait Society. We will see you there. George and I and Artifacts will be there. So we will have all our products, and so we will be happy to see you there. And on the last week of the month, on May, we are going to France, and George probably will mention a little bit later about what we will do there. And so we probably just look for announcement, and so then we will send you special email when we will have our next AMA. And reason why, because more we work on that session for today for drying oils, we understand and we touch only a small sleeve of the information what we wanted to give you, but we just didn't want to have that program long and tiring you. So we probably will do more
Right.
programs.
Yeah, the information is just overwhelming. In fact, we started doing a drying tests using a drying recorder in order to get some very precise results, and it shows us that this is going to actually take years. But we did anticipate it taking some time. But each of these tests have to be done over a period of time, and the drying recorder obviously has to actually do it in real time, and some of the drying times last many days, weeks, and so we have to go through the whole process of doing that. So that's we'll talk a little bit about that after we show our video, and we'll get into that.
We do understand we will have a lot of questions, and so that will determine actually what would be our second part of this program, because we do understand and we didn't touch some of them. And be patient, and so we will answer after the video. And another thing, we were talking about to have AMA about the specific colors, and we will talk to artists.
Yeah, we'll do another AMA, and we'll have discussions with and showing how some artists use some of these colors, unusual colors, and some very typical colors too.
So again, give us notice what you are interested in specifically on our colors, and so we will have a special program for that. And don't forget, we have now color notes. Check these videos, and so we are now doing this regularly, weekly. And so again, if you have any interest on some specific colors, give us your ideas. So for now,
so want to keep in mind that there's a lot of technical information, and I didn't put a lot of this technical information in this little video that we made. So what I will do is I'm putting together an article, and it will be released on Friday, and the link for it will work on Friday. I'll put that in there are several links in this program, and if you're in YouTube, if you look down below in the comments, and also in Facebook, if you look at the comments, you'll see the links to several articles on drying oils. They're pretty comprehensive, but there's more information that we'll put through, and probably a little bit broader in scope in this new article, which will be released on Friday. And we'll also have some drying results in that article also. So I guess we should just go ahead and start with the show here. are drying oils? Drying oils are vegetable fats extracted from seeds and nuts that harden to a tough, solid film after exposure to air. The oil hardens through a chemical reaction in which polymers cross-link and hence polymerize by the action of oxygen. Typical drying oils used by artists are linseed oil from flax seeds, walnut oil, safflower oil, and poppy seed oil. These oils are composed of the triglycerides of saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. The drying power is directly related to the chemical reactivity of the triglyceride molecules, linolenic being the most reactive. Linseed oil has the highest proportion of these fatty acids and hence dries faster than the other drying oils. Once raw oil is produced from seeds or nuts, it is refined and processed into different types of oil that can be used in oil painting. The three main categories of drying oils are refined oils, bodied oils, and drying oils. Refined oils include alkali refined oils and cold-pressed oils. The difference between these types is how the oil is extracted. Cold press means that the oil is extracted in a press at a temperature of less than 49 degrees Celsius. Many artists believe oil produced at lower temperature has better properties than hot expeller press or solvent extracted oils. This belief originated before modern refining methods produced oils that are lighter and faster drying than cold-pressed oil. Bodied oils, also known as stand oils, are refined oils that have been heated to high temperatures to thicken the oil. Refined oils that have dryers added are called drying oils. These are also known as boiled oils. Refined oils are heated and a dryer is dissolved into the oil. Historical drying oils contained lead dryers and are often called black oil. Modern drying oils contain manganese dryers and are much lighter in color. To understand how these oils can be used in painting, let's compare their properties. We prepared oil paint with two pigments, in refined oil and bodied oil, to contrast their flow characteristics. We chose lemon ochre, a yellow ochre with large particles, and Mars yellow with very fine particles to show how each oil affects their properties. Each pigment is prepared with refined oil and bodied oil. You can notice in this time-lapse photography that the bodied oil levels and flows out. One of the characteristics of bodied oil, due to its leveling and flow out, is that it produces very stringy, long paint, which is great for making long brush strokes. This can be seen again here, how it levels and flows out, which means that it would cause brush strokes to disappear. That's the leveling and flow out of bodied oils, or highly polymerized oils. This is very different from refined oils that do not show much leveling and flow out, although they have perhaps a little bit more oil than necessary in these particular images. Again, we see how the refined oil tends to stand up, whereas the bodied oil also produces very long, stringy effects when touched with a palette knife or with a brush. We can see this in the leveling and flow out. Here we see very short, buttery type paint with refined oils, but with bodied oils, we see how the leveling and flow out tends to increase over time. This also means that the paint has more drag or more resistance under the brush or under a palette knife. One cannot make oil paint with just a bodied oil. However, blending the two can make very interesting paint. Have you ever wondered why certain colors mix better with oil than others? It all comes down to something called pigment wetting. Basically, when we make oil paint, we need the oil to replace any moisture or air around the pigment particles. But not all pigments are created equal. Their wetting properties depend on the type of pigment and oil being used. Plus, the thicker the oil, the harder it is for the pigment to mix in. So if a pigment doesn't mix easily with oil, it means it has poor wetting. For example, ultramarine blue is hydrophilic or water-loving, so it doesn't blend easily with oil. Vegetable oils are classified as nonpolar liquids due to their chemical composition. Being nonpolar, they do not easily mix with polar substances like water. However, it's important to note that oils are not a homogeneous substance, as they consist mainly of nonpolar triglycerides, but also contain polar substances such as phospholipids. As a result, the degree to which each oil can mix with different types of pigments can vary significantly, and this process is referred to as pigment wetting. Therefore, the interaction between different oils and pigments is a complex phenomenon that is determined by the chemical characteristics of each component involved. When oil paint is initially mixed, the pigment particles may not be uniformly coated with oil, leading to a stiff consistency. However, over time, the oil will begin to wet the surfaces of the pigment particles, causing the pile to become more pliable and slump. Initially, the pigment particles resist wetting by the oil, but eventually the oil displaces any air or moisture surrounding the particles, allowing it to become fully coated with the oil. Pigment wetting is an essential aspect of achieving a consistent paint mixture that varies with each type of oil. Different types of oil have varying wetting properties when it comes to specific pigments. For example, walnut oil has slightly better wetting properties with ultramarine blue than alkaline refined linseed oil, although some types of linseed oil may perform better than others. This process helps to evenly disperse the pigment in the oil, ultimately leading to better pigment wetting and a more desirable paint consistency. The viscosity of oil is a critical factor in achieving the desired consistency of oil paint. Refined oils have low viscosity, making them thin and fluid, allowing them to be absorbed quickly by pigment particles. This results in a smooth and fluid paint consistency, ideal for certain glazing techniques. In contrast, bodied oils have a higher viscosity due to the presence of long polymer chains, which make them thicker and less fluid. As a result, paint made with bodied oils have more drag and resistance under the brush, which is excellent for some techniques and substrates. Bodied oils increase the leveling and flow out of paint, ideal for blending brush strokes or eliminating brush marks on the painting. While bodied oils do not wet pigments as well as refined oils when making paint, they provide a heavier bodied paint that is often useful for certain painting styles. We are preparing a drawdown of yellow ochre and Mars yellow to measure gloss. The size of pigment particles affects the appearance of dried oil paint. Larger pigment particles scatter light, leading to a more matte appearance, while smaller particles scatter light less, creating a glossy appearance. The use of finely ground pigments can therefore result in a more reflective surface, whereas large pigments produce a more matte appearance. The choice of oil used in painting can also affect the glossiness of the finished artwork. Refined oils, which have low viscosity, tend to produce a matte finish when used in oil paint. In contrast, bodied oils tend to produce a more glossy finish when used to create oil paint due to their high viscosity. The high polymer chain content of bodied oils creates smooth paint surfaces that produce specular reflections off the surface of the dried paint, creating a more glossy appearance. On the other hand, the lower polymer content in refined oils do not create a smooth surface, resulting in a matte appearance. Therefore, when selecting the type of oil to use, it is essential to consider the desired finish and how the choice of oil will impact the overall appearance of the painting.
Okay.
Just a second, that was kind of interesting. Green screen back on.
Okay. Surprise. So anyway, seems like a lot of information, and sometimes even think we think maybe we will give too much information and people are confused. But the idea behind giving you that many, in fact, we have 20 different oils, and the idea behind of giving you that many, because each of oil, now you know that every each oil will behave different. It's for different properties and for different behavior. And it's like, you know, before it was when you go to store and you buy one linseed oil and one stand oil, and it's like one tool for every each of you. But George decided to give you a range of oils, and every one, he actually on website he explains what is this for, and you don't need all of them. And on the end, you probably need only one linseed oil, which would be refined linseed oil. What is the best one for to make your paint, and maybe just to verify the strokes and the behavior of the paint given to bodied oil.
Right. In reality, if you're using oil as a supplement to your painting, in other words, you're not making oil paint, then you really only need two types of oil, and that's a refined oil and a bodied oil. So those are really the two main choices that every artist probably should have, because as you can see, the bodied oil has some very distinct advantages as a medium when you add it to your paint, because it, as you can see, it increases the leveling and flow out. So especially in a technique where you want to increase the gloss, as an example, especially if you're, let's say, using umbers or any kind of pigments that tend to sink in and dry matte, then bodied oil added to your paint will help to correct that. And then you can also use it to blend brush strokes, to get rid of brush strokes in a painting. Some people like that kind of effect. The so-called little Dutch masters, not because they were little people, but rather that they were less important or less well-known artists of the 17th century, 16th, 17th century. They did many paintings where a lot of the brush strokes are not even visible, and they did that with bodied oil. They had heat bodied oil at that time too. So those are some of the techniques that can be done, and you can see that if you're making your paint, of course, the whole range of oils can produce many different interesting results.
Check our color notes for April. We covered a lot of umbers, and we talked specifically about bodied oil. But now let's go to questions, and we have a lot of questions.
So we'll start with Uncle 60. How you doing?
Look like you're our biggest fan here.
Regular member here. Thank you, and welcome. Oils in oil painting can be overwhelming, and that's of course true. I have tubes of paints mixed in linseed oil, walnut oil, flower oil, safflower oil, excuse me, poppy oil, and a new one, gouache oil paint. I'm not familiar with. Can I mix your oil with either one? You can mix any of these oils together. If you saw towards the beginning of that video that we had a table there, and it showed you the constituent components, or fatty acids, or in reality triglycerides of oils, and they all contain the same types of triglycerides, just in different amounts. So they are highly compatible with one another. So you can mix them. Now the question is, why would you want to mix them? That is another question, and that would bear out, for instance, if you're mixing a bodied oil with a refined oil, you can get some of the benefit of the bodied oil. Obviously, too much bodied oil would cause as we mentioned in the video, cause that brush stroke to drag, to be very difficult to manipulate if it was just pure bodied oil. But the mixture of the two, you can get some of the properties of both of them. Let me go on to, you have another question in there, is in production, is all oil a bodied oil to start with? And the answer to that is no. They start off as refined oils, and then they are heated to very high temperatures, either in a vacuum, and that's why if you look on the Natural Pigments website, we talk about a vacuum bodied oil, and we distinguish that from a kettle bodied oil. And I think Tanya has the bottles there. You can see that. And
so here's vacuum body.
That's the vacuum bodied.
And here's kettle body.
Kettle body.
And you can see the viscosity. Here's.
And they come in a range of viscosities
and
too.
Different colors, and of course we do.
And the vacuum-bodied oils will be a little bit lighter in color, and the main difference is that color, as well as kettle-bodied oils will have a slightly higher free fatty acid content. And if you're interested in what that means in painting, I can mention that a little bit later. But is oil medium produced like olive oil? Kind of. They do use presses, but what they do is they usually use, and that's explained in this article that is actually in the comments in the YouTube as well as in the Facebook below. You can see there that we talk about how oils are produced, and they're produced in hydraulic presses. They're called caged screw presses, and in terms of linseed or let's say poppy seed or safflower, the seeds are rammed in there and they're pressed, and then the oil is extracted. In the case of modern production here in the United States, most of the industrial oils are solvent extracted. So they may do a first pressing, but then they do a solvent extraction to remove most of the oil, because it actually yields a much higher amount of oil. They don't typically use solvent extraction for edible oils, and most of your edible oils are made by smaller companies. But the large industrial companies, and there's two of them in the United States, in North America here, and they produce most of the industrial types of linseed and soybean oils that are used in a wide range of industry, such as the art materials industry.
Wait for article, because article what George had before, it was great, but working on that video he just modified, and so that will blow your mind. So that in Friday, just keep a email from us. So James, yes, we started this program saying that we will be in Portrait Society. We'll see you there.
Constance has a question. Thank you, Constance. So how can you tell if there is too much oil, especially bodied oil? Bodied oil seems harder to tell if there's too much oil. And that can be true. You can see that when you're making paint, and that's really where you're going to that's probably where your question is. If you're making paint, generally you can't really use just bodied oil. You can add a little bit of bodied oil to the paint, but you really want to use a refined oil for when you're making oil paint, because bodied oil doesn't wet the pigment, as we mentioned in the program there. Doesn't really wet the pigment very well, so you're always going to have too much oil compared to the amount of pigment. So that's why we don't recommend it as the sole oil for making paint. And then, of course, if you're using it as a medium, obviously you can tell if it's too much oil, if it becomes just too runny, or if it's just too hard to drag your brush through it.
The most dangerous, it's already afterwards, because it will be much glossier. So if you don't like gloss, we do have people who call us specifically saying, like, what can I add to the paint to make the painting glossier? But the bodied oil is not necessarily the best way to do, but it's one of that. And in fact, so then that video what we were making, so the test I was doing on March 26, and by April 16, bodied oil, where we had Mars yellow, was still tucking. So imagine, it's almost like 3 weeks later. So be careful with bodied oil. And Danielle, Daniel, I thought you know all our products, but now you reveal then you don't know all because...
So Daniel asked if he likes, I liked titanium over lead white, but it's hard for me to find titanium with linseed oil. Well, you're in luck, actually, because Rublev makes a titanium white in just linseed oil.
And in fact, our titanium doesn't have any fillers.
Right.
Which is probably a little bit difficult to work with because, again, most companies, that's what George started to talk about, most companies do put fillers and then titanium becoming more comfortable to work because the body of the titanium is crazy, but it's only linseed oil and titanium.
Yeah, titanium doesn't have very good body in oil, and that's why often they put fillers in there. Also because it's very opaque, and so overpowers many colors and mixtures. And so you can imagine if titanium in other brands have fillers in it, which is done in order to make a more pleasing color, we just said we're just going to introduce it as 100% titanium. The body's not going to be great, the consistency is not going to be great, but we work with artists that know how to work with that,
but again,
and can adjust it. And that's the whole point.
Add our impasta medium to that, and so then it will definitely have a body after that, and definitely will be not as powerful. But this is the way to work with titanium if it's too powerful for you. So Uncle 60, yes, of course it will be yellowing. In fact, titanium yellows in any oils, and so we have in our labs, I bought titaniums from different companies, and of course I did my test. All of them, absolutely all of them, yellowing. And George has this idea why titanium specifically dries yellow, even in the same degree, on some cases even worse than lead white, and it's why.
So currently we still don't understand some of the phenomenon of yellowing oil paint, and it sounds incredible. We've been observing it for hundreds of years, but we still don't understand the complete mechanism for doing it. And there's been a couple of studies to kind of wrap our heads around what's happening. But one theory is, and this seems to hold up with some of the data so far, and this is something that we're going to be investigating in the future, is that this drying speed has a huge impact on the observed yellowing of paint. So, and it's more, of course, it's going to be observed mostly with whites or light colors. And the reason is because, and especially if you have heavier pigments like titanium or lead, what happens is as you apply the film, your fresh paint, and the pigments, and if you have a lot of oil in that paint, of course, when the paint is drying, the pigments tend to settle down in the paint film, which causes it to push up some of the oil. So now you have, as it dries, it forms this kind of skin or kind of a supernatant layer of yellow over the paint. Because when you put it down, it looks white and it looks proper, but as it dries, it becomes yellow. And that's a clue. And we've observed this when we see fast drying paints don't tend to yellow as much as slower. And that's why titanium, which dries very slowly, tends to yellow more than some of the lead whites. Now, not all the lead whites dry as fast, because not all lead white is typically not a fast drying paint unless it's been formulated as such.
Hello Sweden, hello Tokyo, hello Europe, so Spain, and hi everybody, and of course hello California.
So Tanya Hillian, does cold pressed oil dry faster or slower than refined oil? And that's a really great question. And I touched a little bit about that in this video, but there's in the article that will be available on Friday, I'm going to go into a lot more detail about this and describe why this is actually a misconception that cold pressed oil does not dry faster than refined oils. Refined oils definitely dry faster than cold pressed oils, and the main reason is in how they're processed. So of course that wasn't the case, let's say 100 years ago in the 19th century, when they didn't have modern refining methods. And so once we have modern refining methods, the hot expeller pressed or the solvent extracted oils are refined more than typically cold pressed oils. And by the way, most of your cold pressed oils are actually derived from companies that are making edible oils. And that's the case what we do. We actually, our cold pressed linseed oil is actually designed for the edible oil market, although it doesn't have any additives as some companies will put in there. But so it's lightly filtered. It's not that it's raw oil, because you can't really use raw oil in paint, but it's lightly filtered, and so it doesn't remove all of the components that actually slow the drying down. So to answer that question, cold pressed oil dries slower and not faster than refined oils today. That wasn't the case, of course, a little over 100 years ago.
Maybe that is the choice when artists have, if they don't want to use walnut oil because of the, it's not about color necessarily.
Actually, you can show, you have the cold pressed oil here,
yeah,
right?
But it's not necessarily, so here's aged refined linseed oil and here's cold pressed. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying, when people
you may not be able to see it, but it's a little bit darker.
Darker, yeah.
We sourced a really light colored cold pressed oil. But you also have to keep in mind that because these are natural products, they vary from batch to batch.
Yeah, and but what I'm saying, so if people do want prolong the time, but not using necessarily the walnut oil, so is that the case too for that?
You can, yeah, you definitely can. It will be a little bit slower, probably not as slow as walnut oil or poppy seed oil or safflower oil. But it will be a little bit slower. The other thing, why use cold pressed oil, linseed oil? Well, another possible advantage for it, if you're paint making, it has a slightly higher free fatty acid content, which may be advantageous if you're making paint. Let's say, and that's part of the video where we showed you about ultramarine blue. We showed you how it's heavily affected by we showed it with just one of the oils. We didn't have time to put all the different oils, but we've made it and with different oils, and it reacts very differently with each of the different oils, like a refined oil, the walnut oil,
and pale grinders,
and a pale grinders oil, which is another oil which for most people using as mediums, this is what it looks like. It's a very pale oil.
To compare with aged refined, so you can see that.
So it's a refined oil. The difference is we actually make this. So we start off with a refined oil, and then we put fatty acids back, linseed oil, fatty acids back in the oil, and increase the fatty acid content, which is advantageous if you're making paint. Not necessarily for a medium, but especially if you're making paint, and especially if you're making paint with reactive pigments. And there's an article on the blog in the Natural Pigments website talks about reactive pigments. So if you are making paint, you may want to look that up. Also, if you go to the pale grinders oil, and we also reference some of that information there too.
So Constance, so we make our oleo gel with aged refined linseed oil, which is like this. And of course we do we do have epoxide oil gel, which you see why in gel it's look lighter than oleo gel. So it's because of the color of the epoxide oil. And of course we do have walnut gel, which is even lighter than that. And so, but oleo gel is specifically with aged refined linseed oil, and it's why when people use that one specifically, it looks matte. Then compare, like, let's say, like with epoxide oil, where it's look a little bit slightly glossy.
So the next question from Joey. Hi, Joey. Would you recommend a medium of refined linseed oil cut with or thinned with mineral spirits 50-50 or 60-50, sure, that's if you want to use mineral spirits or any other type of solvent, you can certainly do that. You may also want to experiment especially if you're having sinking in, which, by the way, solvents tend to encourage or promote sinking in for certain colors. So if you experience that a lot, then what you may want to do is add a little bit of bodied oil into that mixture, maybe at a rate of 10 to 20% in that range, and you'll find that it'll help mitigate some of the sinking in, increase some of the gloss of that, because when you're using solvents, it tends to make more matte paint films. But of course, if that's what you need or want, then don't use that at all.
Okay, here's about epoxide.
I can't, Jaja is Scallon, I guess. Welcome. Would epoxide oil be considered a bodied oil? Also, is there a way to reduce the gloss in bodied oil? Maybe by adding calcite. Okay, good points there.
Yeah.
Great questions.
So epoxide oil, again, George mentioned so many times, oils are natural substance, and so if you did buy our epoxide oil, let's say 10 years ago, it was completely red like this. So, and nowadays we had the oil like this, so epoxide oil. I again, I think it's personal, so I really think that it's bodied oil. That's why
it is a
glossy.
bodied oil. It is a bodied oil.
It's
You can see it's a little
low
bit.
viscosity for the body oil, but it is bodied oil.
It's technical. It's actually a synthetic oil, but it's derived from linseed oil. So, and the reason why we call it synthetic oil, because what they've done is you take refined oil and they put a monomer with it and they copolymerize it. So they link this monomer with the polymers in the oil. And what that does is it changes the properties of the oil. So it starts off as linseed oil. So now it's an epoxide oil. It's the chemical structure has been altered. It dries faster than most bodied oils, but it isn't a dryer. So just keep that in mind. It's not technically a drying oil, which we'll talk about. And we mentioned briefly in the video. So, but some of the advantages it's a little bit faster dry than bodied oil. It doesn't have quite the viscosity of a bodied oil. And we're the only company that's introduced this to artists. It was originally developed in the 1940s, 30s, in that range, as what they call a reactive diluent. So in order to, it was actually designed to replace the solvent in alkyd formulations. So it has a lot of good properties. It dries harder film and less susceptible to alkalis and things like that, which may not be a big concern for some artists.
Often
but
we have,
it's interesting to experiment with it.
Often we have the question, can I use from the very bottom to the end of the painting? Yes, you are. Yeah, absolutely, you can do that.
No.
And to cut the sheen, calcite could be, but again, it's depend how you will use. Sometimes it can, I can't say mud up, but it can veil off your color. So we do have fumed silica. Don't expect to make your own oleo gel or epoxide gel. So, but that's what essentially is. So because what happened with fumed silica, it does have the surface.
It does reduce gloss in a bodied oil, but on a practical level for artists to use fumed silica, not very easily, because it does, I mean, you should see the equipment we use to disperse the fumed silica into oil. It's no slouch piece of equipment. So for home use, it's more difficult to incorporate a fumed silica. But the best thing to do is just to reduce the amount of bodied oil in the paint. You also saw, by the way, in the video, we showed you how a larger pigment and small pigment. So we showed you the lemon ochre compared to the Mars yellow, which has very small pigments. And you can see there definitely large pigment particles tend to create.
Where is this?
It's probably over there, but anyway, so the large pigment particles tend to create more matte. So just keep that in mind. You could actually, but it's going to create more texture too. So you could add a calcite that has maybe a larger particle, and we do have some of those on the website, and they may introduce some of the matte. There's that.
So you see again.
There's that same one that we showed earlier.
So you see how glossy that is, and so where the lemon ochre, where's the, okay, right here, lemon ochre, even with bodied oil, you see bigger particles, still
gloss,
glass, but still not as bad as this. Okay,
yeah.
I'm looking reverse, and here's Mars with small particles. So again, you have several choices. So you can add chalk, and of course we do have different particle size chalk. So choose the bigger particles of the pigments if you already added into your paint. So then yes.
Okay.
So next one.
Next question. I paint. Let me see. Daniel, I paint with paint from the tube in layers. Can I add a new layer again with just straight paint again, or must I always be conscious to add a little bit of refined or bodied oil to the paint each time? And basically, if you're painting straight from the tube, you really don't have to add more oil, but you can if you want just a little bit. But if you keep it, paint at the tube, as we talked about in the fat overlaying, and if you haven't seen that video, I do recommend going to that, because we dispel a lot of myths about the fat overlaying principle. But look at that video, and it's in the playlist for Artist Materials Advisor in YouTube, and you'll see the full explanation there. It'll provide a much better explanation than we can really give it here justice. But certainly you can use it straight out of the tube from layer to layer. Neil Patrick Millen, welcome. And he asks, what solvent do you recommend? In reality, we don't recommend solvents. and the reason is for health reasons. And that's the only reason why we don't recommend solvents. You can paint completely solvent free, but if you are going to use solvents, then minimize their use if you can. I know some techniques just absolutely beg for solvents. They just absolutely have to have the solvent for those particular techniques. And if that's the case, then obviously use it. Odorless mineral spirits is good.
I think it's
turpentine is another choice.
I think it's a fault of the companies actually, because you see what companies do now. It's they are advertising solvent-free paint, and so what's that supposed to mean? It's confusing for people. It's kind of like idea immediately. If you paint with oil paint, that means you must use solvent. Absolutely not. And we had already so many videos done, and we probably need to repeat again just about solvents, talk about, and so you don't need.
Certainly not to wash or clean brush or clean surfaces. You don't need any solvent to do that. Oil paint is a very eco-friendly paint and actually not toxic, except for if you're using certain pigments. But other than that, if you're using just earth colors as an example, then it's completely considered to be not toxic. But you don't really have to use any solvents with oil paint. But you can if you need to do that in for any particular type of technique.
Remember, solvents not becoming part of your painting, they evaporate. So then you need to remember about that. You can dilute as much as you fancy, but you need to remember then you overbound the paint if you use a lot. So Michelle, yes?
Yep. So those bodied oils are so dark in the bottles. Does that darkness show up in the paint surfaces, especially when used with lighter colors, such as white and light pigments?
Look at that. We have sun thickened linseed.
But I think the first show the bodied oils again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they are.
So
They're
they're darker. They're darker. Here's the kettle bodied. Here's the linseed oil. It looks a little bit darker in the video or in what I can see on the screen than it is in real life. But again, you're not going to use a lot. And if you looked at, again, go to that fat over lean video, because what we're telling you there is not to use any oil. I know everything sounds like it's contradictory. In other words, avoid the use of oil and oily mediums in your painting, and you're going to be much better off. But if you need to do that, then you can add some bodied oil, but you're not going to add a lot anyway, and it won't show up. Keep in mind that the pigments hide the yellow of the oil, and that's why, you know, this whole idea of using lighter colored oils like safflower oil doesn't make a lot of sense, especially in the bottom layers of the painting. It makes no sense there, because you're not going to see, and if you're using darker colors, you're not going to see any of that anyway. You're not going to get any benefit from the safflower oil, and there's reasons why you never would want to use safflower oil paints at the bottom layers of your painting. So maybe if you're putting in a very bright white highlight, or maybe a very delicate blue, where it could be affected by the yellowing, then you may want to use a lighter color oil like poppy seed, walnut, possibly safflower oil, which is a much newer oil that's been introduced. So we don't really have as much of a history of using those oils, such as walnut or poppy oil does.
So here's exactly the same question about Daniel. Is next one is due.
I know linseed oil is a fast drying oil, but pardon the question, but why is it fine for many? I know many artists do use linseed oil in upper layers rather than slower poppy, safflower, and so forth. Again, linseed oil tends to make better paint films overall, and that's why you would want to continue using it throughout the entire painting. And the only reason to use any of these other oils would be based on, for instance, the color, like very white color, or highlights, or a very delicate blue.
Yeah.
But generally, again, I see the misconception is always, yes, you do want to have slower drying paint films, but that is not a big deal if you're letting your paint films dry to hard dry. And that's another important thing, because if you don't, then you've got more and more problems that potentially occur. Most of the time, what's happening is the artist is not letting that paint film dry well, and they start to work another paint layer over that, and that's when you get into more of these problems with the effect of, either faster drying or slower drying layers of paint. So this whole idea of, regulating the speed of drying with each layer is a little bit overthought, unless, of course, you're not following, allowing the paint film to dry, hard dry, not touch dry, because that's a whole different ballgame there. And
which we will designate whole AMA program just for that, because George bought that new equipment where we
that's where this
precisely
drying,
measuring. So.
That's why we're all doing all this drying studies to actually demonstrate that whole idea. So Mark Durbin, welcome. I blended 75% refined linseed oil with 25% stand oil for making my earth colors. Umbers, ochre, siennas. Will that cause a problem later on as the cold press refined oil polymerizes? No. Keep in mind that the bodied oils dry a little bit slower, and the reason is because a lot of the double bonds, the conjugated double bonds in the oil, have been utilized for the polymerization, so that they have fewer reactive sites to actually dry. but that doesn't cause a problem, especially in that kind of form where you have a 75, a 3-to-1 ratio. So that I don't see any problem with that whatsoever.
Daniel, you need to call me, and then we will talk on the phone about. But again, read the.
So Tanya.
I thought Daniel. How come you have? I don't have. Here's Daniel.
Oh, did I skip something?
Okay. Yeah. So here's about trying to get titanium to act like lead. Can I mix in chalk, calcium carbonate, especially in the first layer, to make it feel more like lead white? Would like to mimic lead properties. Nothing can mimic lead, unfortunately, and especially titanium. Titanium probably has the most ridiculous behavior ever from any pigment.
It's a great pigment.
It's
but
good pigment.
Terrible body in oil.
It's actually why many companies added in fillers and
they usually
zinc white.
Yeah, they put zinc to actually harden it because it makes somewhat soft films. That's one of the reasons why they put that there. Zinc white also, of course, helps to correct the propensity for yellowing. It encourages drying. But of course, we know the deleterious effects of zinc white in oil paint anyway, so we avoid that. And some companies make what they call a lead or flake white replacement. What they're doing is they're putting, perhaps they're putting some zinc white, although many of them have now taken the zinc white out. But they're also putting barite, which is a very dense pigment. It's a filler, and they think that making it more dense, that it's going to mimic lead. And
actually, try that.
You can try that.
At least it will make help. This, because our titanium with linseed oil, it will be very long, and but at least barite will give that heavy body to that. So then, obviously, like I said, nothing will make or behave as a lead white, but at least something. And so, calcium carbonate can do, but calcium used just to bulk up, but it doesn't give this heavy feelings.
Okay, there's a Gorilla Fantasy. I love some of these names. It's very interesting. Do you think a new white pigment will ever be discovered, or are we stuck with titanium, lead, and zinc? Yeah. It's interesting. Unlike the colored pigment market, where we can actually develop many, many new colored pigments from organic pigments don't make white pigments. There isn't just any like that. There is, however, a new technology which is very interesting that doesn't use the principle that pigments use, but use the principle of light interference. Now that may be a possibility in the future, but right now we don't see anything on the horizon. So great question though. Honeycomb bones, if that's how you pronounce that. What's the difference between the reversible darkening, yellowing that happens in whites when kept in dark? Between the reversible and darkening yellow. Okay, well, that's a very good question. In the 1970s, Henry Levinson did a whole series of tests where he exposed different white paints and alkyds and different oils, and then he would put them in the dark, and then he would put them back in the light. And we also did the same thing, not as big of a study as he did. And what's interesting is that he found basically that that all oils tend to yellow when kept in the dark. Again, the mechanism for that is not clearly understood. There's various theories on it, but no one has really come out and put their finger on what's going on. But apparently it's reversible, and it's infinitely reversible. In other words, you put it in the dark, you bring it back out again, expose it to light. And by the way, you don't need to expose it. In fact, we don't recommend exposing it to sunlight directly, but just artificial light will do it. and then you put it back in the dark, it yellows again, you bring it back out, and it yellows and it bleaches back to its original color. Infinitely reversible. That's very different. That's kind of a secondary yellowing as opposed to the yellowing that you see maybe on paint films where they form that skin on top of the paint film. That's permanent. The only way to get rid of that is to remove some of that, which is almost impossible to do. So that's a whole different thing. And that's why it's much better to avoid using lots of mediums, such as oils, in your painting.
Which comes to another question with Uncle 60.
Yes, will adding a few drops of linseed oil to each paint layer satisfy the fat over lean rule? And please go look at that fat over lean. Yeah, it's way overthought. It's a very simple thing. Just keep in mind that paint right out of your paint tube is very close to its ideal form. And so adding that to your, you working with that paint alone, you can work with many different layers with paint straight out of the tube without adding a bunch of oil. So you can, if you want to add a few drops, doesn't hurt actually whatsoever. So no problem with there. Honeycombs has another question. What is the difference in mechanism of what happens when white darkens, yellows in a reversible way? Oh, did I just do that? As opposed to, okay, this is just a yes. So we did explain that, and I hope that...
But you are missing Uncle 60. We'll add it in turbs to body oil, reduce the effects of your bodied oil. It will reduce for some time, but when turbs or solvents will evaporate,
when you're working with it,
yeah, sure. Absolutely,
the drag and so forth,
it will reduce absolutely. So that's why people usually add, and that's why we are saying then add bodied oil to your first layers, because add it in solvent, it will be very liquid, but at least bodied oil will prevent sinking in on future. So but yes.
Mm-hmm. Tanya has another question which is related to this. You mentioned in a previous video, if you ever use solvents in the first stage, which is not recommended, I know, we should add 20% of bodied oil to it. Can't we use refined oil instead? Well, here's the issue is, and by the way, there is a course on the Painting Best Practice website called Matte, Glossy, and Everything in Between, where we talk about sinking in matte, glossy paint and the differences and the issues and how to correct that in a painting that you're already doing or at the beginning of the painting. So the issue is that solvents reduce the viscosity of oil, which makes it much easier for that oil to penetrate the layer below it. Okay, because the layer below it is going to be somewhat absorbent. Okay, and as a result, then that oil will penetrate more. So that's why we say that solvents encourage sinking in, and the bodied oil counteracts that. And in this course that we go into, I explain how, for instance, bodied oil consists of very large polymers, and even though it reduces the viscosity, it still maintains some of its viscosity, which means that it doesn't sink in as readily as does refined oil. And that's the main reason for that. Gorilla Fantasy, what exactly is oleogel for? And that's probably the #1 medium that Natural Pigments makes under the Rublev Colors brand. And it's a gel medium.
Yeah, we mentioned several times on different videos because it is our bestseller, and After Lead White. And George created this years ago just for transparency. That was specifically done for, to dilute the color, but not just with oil where you usually overshoot and then it's slimy,
yeah, or slumpy. Yeah.
So with oleogel, at least it's controllable. But of course, like everything else, when you give to artists some tools, so they will use and abuse, and which is good This what artists are for. And so the now oleogel is used for so many different things, but main probably for oiling out. That is probably the most comfortable way to oil out, because you need the smallest amount. If it's on your finger or on sponge, we sell special sponges on natural pigments, so they will not have any residue leave on surfaces, and so you just apply the tiniest amount of oleogel. So then artists using as a wet couch. What else?
It's primarily glazing medium, but
glazing
it's
medium.
pure. It's almost pure linseed oil. There's a small amount of the fumed silica in there to help gel it, and
Please use sparingly.
we just
Oh, hi
recommend
from Mexico.
Pablo, and I want to use safflower oil as a medium. I am confused because some say that even after months it may still be wet, and its paint film is very weak. And the reason for that, by the way, and it's basically true. It dries very, very slow because it doesn't have a lot of the triglycerides that are reactive to air, to the oxygen, which promotes drying. And so with less triglycerides that are reactive, it tends not to form quite as solid films. The films are softer overall. And so there's a lot of disadvantages to that. There's also the fact that some of the components in the oil volatilize after over some time, which means that the paint film is shrinking. So for the only reason that we would really need to use something like that is if you're, like we mentioned earlier, if it's for very bright highlights or pale blue colors that
Pablo,
you suspect is going to be problematic.
Usually when people call us, the first question we always ask, why is that specifically you want to use this one? And if it's just for open time, better to use at least walnut oil. And because we saw on one of the museums, we went in, was it in Texas, where years later, in restoration laboratory, so years later, painting was seeping, and that was specifically for, and I have these pictures even, we probably should find that.
Yeah.
And it was dried completely at the time when artists finished the painting, but 5 or 10 years later it started seeping, weeping,
Yeah.
seeping.
And there's been, and of course, there's been other cases of oil paintings becoming destabilized over a period of time. The one caveat there is that the paint had a combination of sunflower or safflower oil, which definitely want to avoid paints that have that formulation.
And again, if you are painting actually very thin, so then you can use any oils. But if you use somewhere in pasta,
Generally,
be careful.
linseed oil is the overall best to use.
Yeah.
So that's why we're doing this program. I mean, there are reasons to use all these different oils, poppy seed oil. There are reasons, but there should be a reason, not just because I like the name of the oil or I like that it comes from a particular plant or anything like that. That's not a reason to use it. That's why we're going through these kinds of could be a little bit painful details for some.
Candice have a question. So what is the benefit of using kettle body over vacuum within a painting?
So not much not much difference. Some artists that we've talked to definitely see a difference. It's pretty subtle. So I can't say there's going to be a big difference between the vacuum bodied and kettle bodied as a medium in your painting. If it's, for instance, if you're making your paint and you have a reactive pigment, then there is going to be a big difference in how the pigment reacts to the overall medium. If you have some kettle bodied there, and that has to do with the higher free fatty acid content of that oil, that is the kettle bodied oil. And that's, of course, you can look up some of that information on the website for those particular products. Me,
Sorry.
if I want to create a more liquid quality to my oil paint so it goes on very smoothly, can I use an oil or must I use odorless mineral spirits? If yes, oil, what oil is best, or is the medium better? Here's the thing about oil paint and the mistake that many, and I'm not saying that this is a mistake that you're doing, but a mistake I hear a lot of artists telling or asking us about. I want to use oil paint like watercolor, like a wash. And the problem with that idea is either you're going to have to use a lot of solvent, or if you use a lot of oil, it's going to take forever to dry, and the oil is going to yellow terribly, and there's going to be lots and lots of problems. Oil paint is not designed to be used in very fluid states. Now, the solvent will assist in that, because the reason is because adding more oil doesn't enhance the paint, and in fact tends to work against it. So adding more oil increases gloss, increases the drying time, increases its also vulnerability to solvents and things like that to some degree, and just makes all kinds. And of course, the biggest problem is yellowing. So avoid adding a lot of medium. So the only way to really make it more fluid without compromising the paint with lots of oil is to use a solvent. That's really the only way to do that. And but oil paint really isn't best used in these washes. It can be used as a toning, and I know some artists that are actually toning their substrates, their grounds, and the way they do that is they just take paint from the tube, add a little bit of oil to it, and just rub it into the ground itself. That's one way to do it without any solvent. Neil Patrick, should you change the type of varnish you use depending on which oil you are using? Not necessarily. Of course, softer oils tend to dry slower, and like poppy seed, safflower, and walnut oil. So if they're in the upper layers of the painting, you really need to then be careful of making sure that the paint film is hard dry, not touch dry, but hard dry. So, but any varnish can be used with different oils.
So you have Uncle 60, and actually the second question, it's not a question, it is, looks like you are saying then you are lazy, yes, for cleaning the brushes. So here's the question.
Well, it's just a statement, I guess.
Yeah.
I use safflower oil and 2% clove oil to keep my brushes from drying. I'll dip them instead of washing brushes between painting sessions. If that works for you, okay. We tend to not recommend. We definitely don't recommend putting clove oil in your paints for various reasons. I wrote a whole article on clove oil in the blog. And by the way, folks, if you haven't looked at the blog on Natural Pigments website, please do so. There are well over 200 articles, very detailed information that you can't find anywhere else. And there's a whole information about clove oil and pros and cons of using clove oil in painting.
What is this coffee money? You know what, I rarely on Facebook, on YouTube or something, but I see here's Uncle 60 give 19.99 coffee money. What is this? Is that something new for? Should I say thank you?
Okay.
Anyway, so let's go further. So what do you see?
Okay, next one I have here is Kundalini Rising. Okay.
Hello.
With your dark drying oil and others, do we need to be highly aware of possible combustion when cleaning it up with rags and paper towels? Is there anything we can do to neutralize that aspect? That's a very good question.
Good question.
And so with any oil, and there is the danger of auto combustion, and what that means is that if you have rags and you've got lots of oil paint, not just oil, but oil paint in them, especially red iron oxides, especially are very prone to this. And if you bunch these rags up and put them someplace where they're exposed to air, they will start to heat up, and they could auto combust. And that's why we recommend every artist in their studio, just for safety, because we've seen some studios burn up because of this. In fact, a small paint manufacturer burned his facility up.
And George had post. We had in our factory.
We have safety cans everywhere, but even with
that was open, like the can was open little bit, and then it was enough air
to get in
to go and started warm up.
It started to warm because actually smoke was coming. It didn't ignite yet, but it would have ignited if it had been left a little bit more time. And this was just overnight, by the way. So the safety practice, buy a safety can. These are usually big red cans. They've got a lid on them. The lid is always closed. You have a little foot pedal to open it, and you put your rags in there. And then, of course, the best practice is to put them in a plastic bag, put some water in it, and then put it outside in your regular disposal. And again, follow local regulations, federal regulations, state regulations, county regulations for the proper disposal of these kinds of materials.
But in between, so if you paint in your studio and just to be safe, have a plastic bag, put in the plastic bag and cover, close completely. So then at least that, and it will help.
Okay. I'm going back here and looking at...
Silica don't breathe the stuff. What, am I missing something? So, okay, here's Joe. I don't understand how...
Okay, so I've got Tanya Hillian. Does epoxidol kind of replace Dahmer gum used in traditional mediums? Definitely, it can be a replacement, but it doesn't perform the same way. Just keep that in mind, because Dahmer, which is usually used as a varnish, let's say with turpentine, has other properties that epoxidol can't mimic. So, and by the way, there is an article going back to the Natural Pigments blog. We have a whole article talking about using oleoresinous mediums such as Marager, Dahmer in your painting, like the Ralph Mayer medium, which I call a trifecta of disaster. Please read those articles, give some really good sense about how to use these kinds of mediums in your work.
Looks like we have completely different. So here's Joe. I don't understand how you paint without solvents. All my classes have us painting with it and then editing oil. You are studying on strange school, because what we hear, actually, the schools are now all over the country absolutely prohibiting solvents. So I don't know if lucky are you or not lucky. I don't know how to say, but again, so just add the oil if you do need to add oil, but solvent, it's again, you need to add all solvent, add it, but just remember about your health and future, because it's not like you breathe and you suddenly, in danger, but it's accumulate through the years, through the time. And we do have people call us weekly. I promise you, weekly we have phone calls in our office where artists saying that I painted 30 years, nothing happened to me, and then one day they come to studio and they have horrible headache, and since that they can't even be in same room with solvents. So it's up to you to do as an artist, and definitely I would talk to teachers if obviously everybody know about danger about solvents, but if that is technique, what you need, because we always saying that there are needs for that. So I mean, let's put the varnish. That's, you can't have varnish without solvent. So then one way or another you use solvents in your studio. But if it's only just to dilute the color, just use the oil.
Okay, so the next question I have, so I'm marking some of these. There's lots of questions here, and we'll stay with you as long as you want. So the Nicholas Rolfe, why do companies use plastic caps on their paint tubes rather than metal caps, which don't get brittle and crumble into pieces over time?
We are with you.
We would love to do that. We would love to do that. Unfortunately, the world doesn't use metal caps because it's very expensive, and like they used to be, they didn't obviously have plastics in the 19th century, so they just use plastic caps, and it's always a problem, especially with oil paint, because the plastic is somewhat susceptible to the actual vegetable oils.
That's why it's
They
breaking.
weaken
It's
and so forth. It's just a constant
we hear
problem.
you, but I remember when George first time when we had the first couple leads broken, he said, "That's it. I am looking for the for the metal ones." First of all, we did find long time ago. It was probably like 15 years ago, but the tube was more expensive than the paint. So
you have to
it's
keep
like,
in mind that these tubes are made by large industries. They're not based. They're only based in South America, India, and China. That's the only places where they make tubes, and they make tubes for a host of other things, not for artist paints. I mean, the number of tubes we buy is fairly big, but compared to, let's say, another company that is making, like maybe some kind of cosmetic or other kind of product, it pales in comparison. So we have no real say in how that works, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a pain point. Ron, what would you recommend for a slow drying linseed oil? I'm not sure I understand that question, but
if it's linseed oil but slow, because linseed oil dries. We just talk about cold pressed linseed oil drying slightly longer. So maybe we do have a pale drying oil. So that is a linseed oil with manganese dryers. That dries incredibly fast. So you can add a little bit of that to it's opposite.
your paint.
He wants slow dry.
Oh, a slow dry. Okay. If that's the question, if you want slow drying linseed oil, use slower drying pigments, and of course a cold pressed linseed oil will dry a little bit slower.
Ron, if we didn't answer, just write again.
Write again, yeah. A man, glad to have a man here. Where can I buy your stuff? I live in Ireland. I bought some of your tube paints from Supreme. Well, that's one place, Supreme Paint in I think they're in Devon.
Actually,
also we have our website, naturalpigments.eu. We ship from Germany to Ireland.
Yeah, and it's not that expensive shipping. But
And
again,
they
if
do
you
have-
you do want to ask Supreme, because he actually does order.
But I think he's looking for pigments.
That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
So I'm sure James will be happy to.
He might do that,
to
might special order.
And if not,
Yeah.
so then yes, the naturalpigments.eu we do have there.
Yeah. Nicholas, what are your thoughts of using sun-thickened linseed oil as your primary medium? Yeah, it's fine. I don't see the major advantage of using it over maybe other oils, but there is a reason to maybe use it. In terms of a thicker oil, it's a kind of a bodied oil, but it's also oxidized, so it is going to dry faster than some of your bodied oils. Some of the bodied or sun-thickened oils are darker and lighter. It just depends how it's processed.
You're welcome, Martin.
Lynn Price, flake white replacement has the ropiness of flake white, but is more opaque, so maybe not what people are looking for. But the one disadvantage that flake white replacement doesn't have is the fact that it doesn't form strong paint films. Only lead white does that.
And I, again, I check whatever exists replacements, they're yellowing badly. And I mean, whoever is talking about lead, the yellowing actually not even close. So I don't even know what's the good about. So I don't know. It's
Yeah, I mean, what advantage it has over, over just let's say titanium, or there's no advantage
I
over
mean,
lead, obviously.
use titanium or a titanium buff if I mean some companies doing titanium buff. I
Yeah.
think it's
Daniel asks, is it best to wait? Is it best to wait for hard dry for every new layer rather than just touch dry? If hard dry seems way too long, just wait a little bit more is a good principle. It's, again, that's the best practice. You may be able to get away with painting, if it's taking too long to dry. Again, if you're using lead white, you're going to get paint to dry faster. I did say earlier that lead white is not a dryer. It isn't, but it does promote through drying, which is a good thing, and which is going to be actually very important in that sense, because the problem with the drying process is that it's top down always with paint, oil paint, and with lead it does promote it all the way through. So that's why we recommend lead white in that particular instance. If it wasn't for the benefits of lead white, we wouldn't recommend it at all.
So Nicholas is asking, where are you getting these questions from? I don't see any of this thread. Is this scripted? You know what, Nicholas? I am with you here. So George has some questions. I have another questions. It's like
this is being simultaneously
with
live on Facebook as well as YouTube. And so
that's now.
So we're getting questions from everybody from both places. Constance asks, what about lithopone instead of titanium? As many are asking for an alternative white. Lithopone is another good white. It's a very bright white, very slow drying. Again, doesn't have the benefits in oil paint as does lead, but certainly. That is an alternative. Thank you.
Suddenly it becomes so popular. I don't know. We had years and years lithopone, but suddenly people, maybe just because we started talk about as a replacement for the lead, because it is a little bit more transparent, like zinc. And of course it dries longer, but it's actually not yellowing as much as like, let's say, titanium, although it dries longer, but it's definitely not lead, so that's good. So
Uncle 60, what's your opinion on using Venice turpentine? It's thick and has to be thinned. Well, yeah, it's an oleoresinous mediums. So now you have a little bit more information about what we think about it. Overall, if it's genuine Venice turpentine, it actually has some good properties that can be beneficial. But remember, don't use mediums overall in the painting. Use them for a specific purpose where they actually have some benefit. But to slather an entire painting with a medium is really the wrong approach for using any kind of medium. Derek has a question, and this is a good question. When you say paint straight from the tube is close to the ideal consistency, do you mean specifically Rublev oil colors? I would assume other manufacturers' paints are a bit stiffer than desirable. And the reason why some other manufacturers' paints may be a little bit stiffer, not all of them, but some of them are, is because of the additives that they put. And I'm not talking about fillers. I'm talking about additives, and specifically castor wax tends to make paint very, very stiff. So in that particular instance, yeah, you may have to add some oil in order to loosen it up. Rublev color paints don't have any additives, so they don't have quite that same stiffness as a result.
Although
they're all different.
Yeah,
that's
we had artists who said then some of our colors so stiff, so then. And they need to add oil, and so it again, you see, that's why we are talking about range of the colors, range of the mediums, and definitely range of the varnishes, because that was provided before. So just one fits everybody. So no. And so again, we can't say about other companies, but for us, it's even, I'm sorry, Derek, even for in our range of the colors, some colors like ambers could be much stiffer than, let's say, you take our yellow ochres where they, long and stringy. So it's but I think look that Fat Over Lean video, and where we're talking about exactly the idea. If it's in a tube, even if it's looser, it still has this CPVC and or
critical pigment volume concentration.
Yes. And so it is best to paint with that. If you do need to add oil, add the linseed oil. That would be the suggestion.
Peter has a question: is lead white worth the possibility of lead toxicity, even though thoughtful use should be okay? Absolutely, it's worth it. And that's why we recommend it. Again, if it wasn't for the benefits that lead white has in oil painting, we wouldn't recommend it. We don't recommend it in any other medium, by the way, because it doesn't have the same benefit, but it is worth the toxicity. I mean, it's worth the...
Used it.
Not worth the exposure, but it is worth taking the caution to use it. And by the way, in any case, you should take the same caution with any color you're working with, because one thing we don't know today is the toxicity of all the materials we're using. So let's keep that in mind. Daniel,
we address already so many videos for the lead white, and specifically about toxicity, and we are the first ones who tell you prevent any exposure, breathing or eating. And obviously we hope as a adult artist you don't do that. So, but yes, definitely.
And there's several videos about lead white, by the way, in the YouTube playlists on the Rublev Colors channel. Please look those up. Those are very informative too. Daniel asked, by the way, regarding titanium white, Holbein in Japan has a titanium with barite, but only with safflower poppy binder. Is letting it stand and remixing with linseed oil good? Yeah, you can do that. You can do that, but it's not going to change it much because the safflower is still there overall.
I need to read that. Mike Havis said, "Thank you both for taking such a personal interest in education and customers and sharing the knowledge live and real time. Love you both." That's why we're doing, because I want to hear this.
This is why we're doing this.
Thank you, Mike.
Selling, making great products is one thing, but helping artists navigate through all of this, just the wealth of information and barrage of all these different choices and the marketing hype that goes on. It's so important just to kind of educate people on what to do here.
Always amazing, especially these new days. Each of us suddenly started pay attention to our health, was what we eat, and we read every label. We understand what is good for us, what's not good for us. But artists don't think about health of their paintings. And so, I mean, health meaning on longevity. And so if you don't understand from the beginning, so then what to expect later. So that's why we are doing, and it is important, and it's not your fault in reality, because basically
there's no education.
We've
education.
found that there's no education in that, and
in
so
regards to materials.
And we are doing our best to do. Yeah, we are trying. Yes, thank you.
Jody Whitemore asks, can I grind all colors in 50-50 linseed walnut mix and add a touch of bodied oil even needed? You don't need bodied oil with all colors. That's something that you could do to certain colors if you want to alter its consistency, or if they're prone to sinking in, as we mentioned before. Why you would want to mix 50-50 linseed walnut oil. Here's a rule of thumb, by the way, as a paint formulator, one of the things that I follow is that when you mix two substances together in equal proportion, you basically get none of the properties of each, because they tend to cancel each other out. So if you're going to do something, always do one in bigger proportion than the other. So if you want to do a linseed oil walnut mix, and by the way, I do that in a couple of colors. I usually do one oil as a higher proportion and the other oil as a smaller proportion, like an 80-20 or 70-30 or something of that nature. M.I. Cooper, how can I create very transparent glazes that won't yellow badly without solvents? Normally I use balsam, bodied oil, and solvent. So here is, we did, there's in the playlist in the Artist Materials Advisor playlist, which is the same playlist if you're watching on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, there is a whole video on choosing mediums and paste mediums. It talks about paste mediums. There is an article that also refers to that video, and go to that and you'll understand how you can paint without solvents and still do glazes without any solvents, or with lots of oil that will not, or that avoid or mitigate yellowing. And one very key thing to do, glazes are transparent films, and an easiest way to achieve in a transparent film is simply to apply the paint very thinly. I don't know why that doesn't occur to many artists, but that's probably the easiest way, and it's the way we tend to see the old masters have done it. Gail asks, can I forego the use of 80-20 solvent bodied oil in early passes by using transparent base? Yeah, you can. There is a solvent in the Rublev Colors underpainting transparent base. Just keep that in mind. It is not odorless mineral spirits. It is a mineral spirits, and it is an alkyd. It'll dry very fast, but that's why we made it. So yeah.
George changed slightly
we
formula because it was drying too fast. So if you buy our new batch, so we reduce a little bit at least.
Yes.
But again, if you need prolonged little bit from that, even so, you can add any oil, whatever you like. So yeah. Dries very fast.
Will the transparent base in early passes prevent the use or avoid the use of, or the need to oil out? Possibly. It is fairly matte, which means that it's going to make somewhat absorbent film. So just keep that in mind. But in itself, it has pretty good holdout in itself. So just keep that in mind. It will depend on what you put on top of it, more so than anything else. XX Trag, can I just use 50-50 mix of walnut and to grind colors? Yes, we just talked about that. Avoid the use of 50-50. Do it one bigger to the other.
Yeah.
Tanya, will it provide more or less the same properties as Dammer gum? So Dammer gum is not or Dammer varnishes do not make typically flexible films. They are very glossy, and the epoxide oil actually does introduce a little bit of gloss. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So it does give you that. Certainly it's going to be more flexible than Dammer varnishes. Sarah Simmons, any comment on poppy oil? It's slow drying. That's all, and less color, less initial color. Whether it yellows as much is really going to be hard to say over time, because we really can't observe that very well in existing paint films. So I don't think it's as it's a choice, but is it a good replacement for linseed oil? I really don't. In my opinion, no.
Be careful mixing. So, because remember, we had the program about specifically oils, and poppy oil is at some point losing in the weight, and so where the linseed oil gaining, and so if you're mixing somewhere, so then you can have alligator in, or you can have a crux. So if you paint with poppy seed oil, just stuck with that one. And so Uncle 60 says, I can't imagine how they keep all the info in their brains. One day George will have an AI robot chat doing the video. Great show, guys. Thank you very much.
I'm working on my AI replacement. Yeah, very definitely.
We had the class, we had workshop, and one guy asked me, is like, is he real? Is he even human? Does he get up at morning and clean his teeth and have a breakfast? I was like, yes, he is. So, okay, what is reactive pigments? Pam asked.
Okay, where are you? You've got it. You're looking at something different. Okay. What is
That's
reactive
the question,
pigments?
yeah.
Okay, so I'll answer that question. Reactive pigments are pigments that react with the oil itself. So unlike any other paint medium, like acrylics or let's say watercolors and so forth, there is a chemical reaction between the oil and the pigments, and the reaction usually is where it starts to form metal soaps. These can do different things. In the case of zinc, they cause the paint film to become very brittle. In the case of lead, they strengthen the paint film. They also encourage faster drying and all kinds of other effects. So that's your answer. If you want the list, go to that blog article on the Natural Pigments website where the title is Reactive and Non-Reactive Pigments. So it gives you the full list there. So the next question I have is Jason. What about the use of liquid? Does the faster drying time help with reducing yellowing? Should I avoid liquid? Your thoughts on it?
I thought, will we have a question about liquid? Because there no 1 week we have an office where people call about liquid.
So liquid is an alkyd formulation. It dries very fast. It has dryers in it. It has solvents also. So whether it does reduce yellowing, that really depends on a lot of factors, like how much of the liquid, how fast is the paint film drying. But it's possible it could act in that way. But then again, you see, if you're adding more and more of this medium, then you're actually going away. You're going in the opposite direction, because now you're adding more yellowing medium. Even though faster drying, you're just adding more yellow medium. So remember that the pigment particles can obscure the yellowness of the surrounding medium, but if you have more medium, the light is going through that, then it becomes more yellow. So it kind of starts, if you start pushing it one way, it goes in that other direction, unfortunately.
So, whom you have? Okay.
Daniel.
Yes.
These sessions are really informative, and thank you for answering all the questions. We'd love to see future sessions. Different
Daniel,
drying times, and we're definitely going to do that, Daniel.
And Daniel, I'm pretty sure you order from us. So, and I understand you said that in Japan you don't have any titanium except safflower and poppy. So we do have, and so just we have big tubes, small tubes, and in fact we have even can. I just have somewhere, but call us. Always communicate with our company if you find something interesting and you need it. So just please call us or write to us. So
okay,
what else
Neil,
you have?
I really like the way black oil with litharge handles, but as I understand, it's an inferior for paint films. To be clear, you recommend aged refined. As an overall medium, I don't recommend the black oil. We make it. It was used sparingly in, let's say, old master films. This is, so we call it dark drying oil. It's but it also has black oil with litharge. So this is refined linseed oil, and we cook it at the minimum amount of temperature with the minimum amount of litharge to get it in solution to get the effect. Now I'm also doing some experiments with even more different types of black oil, but again, they're interesting. They do some interesting things, but use them sparingly, please. Or if you don't need to use it And if it doesn't do anything for you, don't use it. There's no purpose in it.
And if you think that this session is informative, so just please visit our paintingbestpractices.com, where we have whole workshop, and we cover everything from grounds, surfaces, pigments, mediums, studio safety, brushes, everything, solvents. So if you don't know about us, so please go paintingbestpractices.com. And so this was workshop what we were giving all over the world before COVID. It was 3 days workshop. Now it's become online class. So Tim Kennedy, would it be possible? Hi, Tim.
So would it be, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. You want to read that?
No, it's okay.
Okay. Would it be possible to add fumed bodied oil to an oleo gel product? We actually have something like that. It's called epoxide oil gel. It's a bodied oil, and it's formulated exactly like oleo gel, except we just put epoxide oil. So that's the possibility of using that. Sure. Let me see. Going next question here.
Gamsol, do you see that?
So Joey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Gamsol in figure class, is this a university thing only? It's Robert Gamblin did a brilliant marketing job in getting people to adopt odorless mineral spirits, and specifically his brand of odorless mineral spirits. And there's many types out there. In getting them and getting people with the idea that it's actually safe to use. Now, he doesn't actually say it's safe to use. He says it's safer alternative to turpentine, which it is. But it's not safe to use. And that's why, especially in schools, there's ways to paint without solvents, and they should be teaching that. They should really be teaching that. And it's just for the fact that the teachers that are teaching in universities have not been taught about materials, so they have no idea what they're doing when it comes to materials. It's really a sad state of affairs, and it's not just in the U.S. It's in Europe, it's in Australia, it's everywhere. It's just the schools have decided that they don't need to teach you about materials. They need to teach you about being creative, and they left out one of the most important things in your curriculum. So Marina, thank you so much for the incredible information you provide. With specific regards to learning alla prima, how would you recommend getting away from using solvents? In some cases, you may have to use solvents in some applications. Some artists use that alla prima. They're painting outdoor. If they're painting outdoors, but generally, well, I'm talking about plein air, not alla prima necessarily, although it's the same type of thing. But it does require a change in technique. You can't approach painting the same way that you've been doing it with solvents and expect the same results. You can't. So it does require rethinking this. There are many different artists out there who are doing this and are willing to share that information. Matt Miller is a good resource. He's teaching up in Massachusetts. I highly recommend. He teaches without solvents. And if you go to the Painting Best Practice group in Facebook, there are some people there that paint without solvents, and that would be a good place to ask that question there.
Pablo, unfortunately, so the question is there somewhere in Mexico to buy your products? Is there import from US? Mexico, it's amazing. It's only country we can't work with. Last holiday season, we had a lot of orders from Mexico, and each of them was or lost or came back to us, and it's something with your customs, and so it's horrible situation, and we can't change anything. And so unfortunately, we do have people do basically, they have relatives here in the country, and so we send to them, and or during the travel time, or they send as a personal, not as a company. And as a company, we can't modify the document, so we need to put a custom. And as soon as the custom, it's just triggered, and whatever they do in there, and it doesn't matter, FedEx or post office or UPS, everywhere the same situation. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's. I lived in Mexico for some years, and las aduanas son muy problema. It's a big problem with there. That's the problem we're having with that. Annie asks, is there any other product that works like lead white in drying upward? Really, there isn't a really good substitute. We know we get this question. People just, all you need to do is just take standard safety precautions when you're using lead, and you can work without being exposed to the toxicity of lead. So it's way, we should be cautious, but I think some individuals overthink the amount of caution. And unfortunately, the media has done a terrible job in heightening fear. It's fear-mongering of lead. Like in The Guardian, that bastion of truth came out with an article pinpointing the way that Caravaggio died. And they said it was from lead from his paint. The problem is there's no body. Yeah. Nobody knows where his body is. So how do we know how he died? Totally stupid idea.
Uncle 60, I'm sure your painting will survive, and so I'm sure 300 years later they will be amused by our art. So
hi, Laura.
Yeah. Hi, Laura.
Good question. When are we getting Maya Blue, Vermilion,
Maya Blue,
Malachite?
he started already work on formula because the company completely disappeared. So we can't find anything about this company. Vermilion, I very cautiously will say then finally Chinese appeared because they completely disappeared during the COVID, and so finally they said then they are alive. So we hope to have Vermilion, and Malachite is coming. So definitely Malachite. We still have Malachite in tubes, I believe. A couple tubes left. We still have on the website, not in jars but in tubes. It's still, and Laura, can you call me please? I need to talk to you about Maya Blue. Is there any products that so we already did this?
Yep.
So what else?
Okay, Daniel, good question here. I know lead white is best, but with two small kids in a small apartment, what safety precautions should I take? And that's a good question. That's a fair question. I am not a professional artist, but I still want a white that is safe with kids. Absolutely, what we do recommend, and we know many artists that have kids and they're professional artists and they paint and they have small apartments. Like one of our good friends has a small apartment in Brooklyn. So and he has two darling small children. And what we recommend is clean up the area. Once you can still use lead white. Clean the area well.
We do have
and put away
cleaning materials for cleaning.
Right,
we have wipes. We have soaps. We have actually the tests. So please be sure that you see that when you buy the lead white, and have a safe, just small safe where children can open. Of course, we know children can open everything with their tiny fingers, but that would be the only way to wait, because you will keep the paint out while you painting. Obviously, I hope the children are not around where you touch it.
It's the main issue is it doesn't emit any vapors. It's not toxic in that way. The main thing is avoid having children touch the material, and if they happen to do that, immediately wash their hands, and it shouldn't be any problem.
So
I'm going to go to Tanya's calcium carbonate, linseed oil is transparent paint that can be added to regular paint to obtain transparent. Exactly, that's a paste medium, by the way, and there's many other minerals, white minerals that are basically transparent oil, and you can all use those to add transparency.
We
to
have
paint.
three. We have Velasquez medium, Impasto medium, and on range of the colors we have bright white. Although it's not white, and many people are confused, but it's very transparent color. So check that one.
Okay.
Pam, on the reactive pigments safety cans are $80, cheaper than the okay.
Uncle 60, do you think a speed painter like Bob Ross style of painter or a plein air artist needs to worry about mediums? Again, if you're painting alla prima, fast drying, since you're making one paint layer in alla prima, if you're not, if you're letting it dry, or if it starts to skin over, now you've got to let the paint dry completely. But in alla prima, you're applying wet paint onto wet paint, and so it doesn't need to be fast drying at this particular point. So just keep that in mind.
So Uncle 60 said bye-bye. He loves to paint, and we will say bye soon because we need to work. This is our entertainment. We'll love to have these sessions because you remember we had these workshops, which, by the way, Michelle Margulies said she attended, and thank you for kind words, because that's when we love to spend time with artists and to find out what you're struggling with, what you need, and so then of course we will jump and do make a product specifically for you. So okay, so any other questions?
Got a couple more questions here,
and we will soon, we will finish soon, don't worry.
So here, so thanks for letting me know. I'm returning to painting full time. This is Susan Gast. Every class in person online advises something different, can get confusing. That's true. That being said, can you take a little bit more time, a little bit more on the safest way to varnish, and do you even have to? You don't have to varnish. That's one thing.
You should.
It's a good idea only because it protects the paint film from dust and debris, and now of course in urban areas with modern air pollution, which actually is doing more damage to artifacts in the last 100 years than 500 years of just, without air pollution. So that's one of the reasons for using varnishes. There's an article, and please go to the Natural Pigments blog. There's a whole article on varnishing there. Actually, several articles on varnishing, selecting varnishes, how to varnish, and everything. We have a course on varnishing in paintingbestpractices.com. Please go to that website. There's some fantastic, very detailed courses. It's a whole education in itself, so we do recommend doing that. We really don't have enough time to even talk about that kind of thing today, but we would love to do that. And we have in the past, and also look at this YouTube channel.
And Catherine said, and she loves our new color notes because it's concentrating on certain colors, that's what we thought then, because we always cover huge areas. So then now we will do this. We are excited. We doing this every week. It was great. And so here's Jason said, then your YouTube videos made me a customer. I got my first shipment and dozen colors in last week, and I am over the moon. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we are over the moon. Then we have new customer like you who appreciate the education too.
So Neil asks, what oil paint might you recommend to a pregnant artist? Neil, basically, if someone is pregnant, they want to paint, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not gonna tell you can continue using, and a pregnant artist can continue using these or using these materials. They can, if they take, again, the kinds of precautions that you should be taking when you're painting at all times. Whether you're using lead or not, you should be taking normal precautions. And we do have some articles about standard safety precautions that you should be using as an artist, regardless of the materials that you're using. So
I would avoid solvents. This
but
is
solvents
the first,
probably is
and
the one thing, you know.
And on our website, you can, George now on new website, he put specific labels where then you can see solvent free. So if you do want to, again, any suggestions, you call us. And so ask us specifically. And if you will find something you like, but you're not sure, call us and we will explain to you what's good, what's not.
And I guess our last question here, Crawdaddy, can you make cold pressed linseed oil less yellow with bentonite clay? Should I be concerned with how yellow the oil is? So again, people are thinking that if they use oils that are brighter, that they're going to get less yellowing. And the issue is not the yellowness of the oil so much. Of course, it does play a part, but the real issue is using too much oil in your paint. That, again, I can't emphasize it enough. Adding bentonite clay will not help that. And for the reason is bentonite clay is basically transparent in oil paint. What you really need to think about is the oil to pigment ratio. We have a whole video on that where we talk about the fat over lean principle. We go into that even more. That's where you really need to focus on those kinds of that kind of idea.
Great.
So thank you for staying with us.
Look at this.
And all the great comments. We can't say enough thank you for everybody. We appreciate the time you spent with us. And we will have another AMA next month, early in the month probably.
Yes.
Yeah. And like we're going to be traveling in France. We're going to be visiting the 3 main ochre sites in France. Our goal is to document the ochre production in Europe. And this is, we've already traveled to many of these places, but we're going to go back now with the idea of documenting all of the information about the ochres and what I believe to be a fading industry, which is unfortunate because it's a mom and pop industry, and it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, and again, see you on Portrait Society in Reston and DC, and so we are excited because we didn't go already. George and I, Artifacts, Anton O'Hanlon went there, but George and I, we didn't go 3 years, and we would be happy to see you there, and see you next AMA. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.